Such a pleasure to meet you. I
Good to
really
meet you too.
enjoyed and was slightly terrified by your performance.
Thanks.
Can you tell me, when you saw the script first, what did you think, given that there's such a motif of thrillers from the 70s and it's clearly inspired by that? Was that something that you recognised, or did you take it on face value as it was?
Well, that was something Gore told me about before I read it. He told me he was inspired by those, and that was exciting to me because those are my favorite kinds of scary movies. But there also seemed to be something really original about it and modern to it that I liked as well. And I knew it was going to be a huge challenge, and it was a message I could get behind. So it had everything that I look for in a project.
And can we talk about the character of Lockhart? Because while he's likeable, I wasn't quite rooting for him from the beginning necessarily.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit maybe about his motivation, or when did you feel like you got to grips with him?
Well, I think, he's a person that is very much in pursuit of his own personal money and power and, climbing the corporate ladder and that kind of thing. And that isn't necessarily a very likable person, but it's also why I think he's the perfect protagonist for this story. I like to think of him as the kind of guy you'd like to have a beer with, but you wouldn't mind seeing him get punched in the face.
It's the ideal friend, right?
Yeah, that's it.
And looking at the filming, you seem to be in almost all the frames, certainly a huge percentage of them. Was that physically very difficult? And I know there's a lot of the kind of torture scenes as well.
Yeah, it was physically and mentally challenging. It really was a huge task. Some days were more physical, some days were more psychological, but every day was a challenge for sure.
Was it hard to kind of decompress afterwards mentally almost?
Yeah, not when we were done, like when we were done, it was time to go home and I was ready to relax. But when we were shooting, it wasn't time to relax. Like, it was time to kind of live it as much as possible, be obsessed with it. So there were a lot of restless nights, a lot of nightmares,
And what was the most difficult scene to film?
Physically the toughest scene was the isolation tank. That sequence, it took 2 weeks to shoot. Gore is such a visual director, and some of the shots he pulls off are so complicated, and the way he cuts things together, so cinematic. It took 2 weeks to shoot that, and I was really strapped into this isolation tank for 2 weeks, breathing out of an oxygen tube, and nothing covering my eyes or my nose, and 20-minute long takes, and it was a really physically draining 2 weeks.
And the rest of the cast are fantastic, and I've seen interviews where you've spoken about the way that they act. With Jason, for example, how it's kind of quite organic, that he likes to just read his lines maybe the day before when he comes on. As an actor, are you constantly crafting, or constantly evolving, or which way do you approach when you come on set and every day?
Yeah, well, for me, there's a lot of work that goes into what I do, a lot of preparation, trying to really figure out the characters and what drives them forward and create that inner life. That's really, really important to me. Obviously, on the day, there's kind of like a blueprint, and within that blueprint is room to play around and to react differently. But in the end, it's all about being truthful. It's all about reacting truthfully, and I think that's what really brings something to life. And as I try to be as in touch with my characters as humans as I can be, and bring that to life.
Try to find something likable about them and find their voice that way?
Yeah, well, I feel like I fall in love with all my characters. I think that's really important. I don't know that I write down things I like about them or anything, but I'd like to think that everyone at least thinks they're doing good for the world. I think that's one thing about Lockhart. He thinks he's well. He thinks what he's doing is right and good, and his pursuit of money and power makes him a good, well person. Even if it's very clear that he's not, that he has the sickness. I think that's where the title of the movie comes from, A Cure for Wellness. Lockhart needs a cure from his wellness, because what he thinks is his wellness is his sickness.
And because the movie is purity versus pollution in many ways, for you, what is the secret to contentment?
For me, it's balance, not too much of one thing or the other, finding a balance, finding peace of mind, and not obsessing over one thing or another, not being super unhealthy, but also not being so healthy that you're unhealthy,
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks.